Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Enterprise AI isn't just a tool, it's the heartbeat of smart organizations like yours, helping to reinvent work to deliver higher growth, more customers, and better experiences. Join us as we discover how AI-powered work orchestration and automation is making things better for everyone: customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. This is a great episode because we're chatting with Dr. Joan Palmiter-Bajorek. Joan is a leading expert in AI and AI governance and the founder of Women in Voice and the CEO of Clarity AI. She has extensively researched the biases in speech recognition technologies. That's easy for me to read, but not so easy to say, and advocates for diversity in AI development. Dr. Palmiter-Bajorek is also the author of the book, Your AI Roadmap: Actions to Expand Your Career, Money, and Joy. There you go. Fantastic. Which provides practical advice on navigating the AI landscape and growing your career, which I wish I had when I was younger than I am now. So welcome, Joan.
Hello, delighted to be here.
I'm glad that you were here too. So you do a lot of stuff. You got your own podcast, you do investing, you got your PhD in something or other. You can tell us all about that. So tell us more about you, because honestly, the intro we have here it's kind of basic, but there's a lot more to you.
Oh, that was a great intro. Thank you. No, honestly, my family doesn't necessarily know what I do, but it's one of those following the project. And
I want to know what you tell your mom that you do. That's what I want to know.
what do I tell my mom? I'm an entrepreneur and don't worry about me.
There you go.
It's interesting to have my B2B, Clarity AI. We do custom AI and data projects, which I love doing. But as I've grown in my career, people keep asking questions. They want resources. As you mentioned about my career, people are like, whoa, how did you do it? Type questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I love giving back. And I wish that I had some of these resources back, when I was 21, giving them to people, serving them up on a plate, the book, which modern careers, I would be so much wealthier, Michael, if I had take whenever. The things you don't learn in school, you don't learn in a PhD program. I love the technical stuff. I love building. Our society is changing rapidly in front of our eyes. And so I kind of see myself as a dual career of the technical work and let's talk about the societal impact, and help prepare people for the opportunities and volatility experiencing now and the next decade, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we certainly have that in common because I feel the same way. Technology is leading to some definite seismic shifts in our society. And it's interesting to see how things are transforming, especially within the corporate or organizational perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So we start talking about the workplace in general and organizations and the fact that they're trying to introduce AI. Initially, you've probably seen this in working with your clients, and we certainly have with ours. It was people dabbled with it, and it was generally in the IT department. They kind of started there, and they kind of worked in behind the doors to see how the technology is working. Then we had tools like OpenAI, where it said, "Hey, come try us out," and a bunch of employees were exposed to this new technology without necessarily having IT guide them through it, and they found some real benefit. With that, the AI teams are changing in their makeup. So how are these AI teams changing, and what kind of role changes would you expect to see from sort of the average employee because of that?
Yeah. Well, I love that you're talking about you see this incubated thing on the side and it's becoming the forefront, or how could you not see it in the news? Right. And I think some companies are going towards it as like the carrot, oh, there's huge opportunity here. And some are like the stick of our competitors, what are they doing behind
Right.
us? And it's never been more accessible than today, right? Like ChatGPT is open for basically anyone with Wi-Fi, a computer. So I think the real opportunity I see is how can we augment our workflows? Where can we make more efficient? Or I think about it as a tool, not necessarily a replacement, but also I'd love to, or something I advocate to all my customers, are we measuring the ROI? What does success actually look like? Are we just dumping capital into something and not measuring the impact? I'm a data-driven person, so that breaks my heart. Let's not waste money, but where do we see the traction? Where can we move the needle? How far are we moving the needle? fiscal viability, those type of questions.
Hmm.
I love talking to customers.
Well, that makes perfect sense, especially considering these tools are fairly accessible. So the theory is, well, hey, it's only $20 a month for an OpenAI subscription to kind of get basic access to stuff, and heck, I can do a lot of stuff with the free version too. So in theory, these tools are pretty accessible for literally anybody to be able to connect with. Uh, but the ROI part of it there, tell me more about what you mean by the ROI. If it is only $20 a month and I've got, I'm a part of a mega huge corporation somewhere and I'm just kind of working in my finance department and I figure, hey, this has actually helped me do my job. Is there really an ROI issue there or should I be looking deeper?
Ooh, there's so many ways to measure a return on investment, right? I think for me, the way I think about ChatGPT for the regular, employee, we could talk about finance, we could talk about HR, but like simple things like drafting emails, debugging code. Like if we can save you an hour a day, let's say $20 a month. Like, I don't know what you bill at, but these can be
Hmm.
big numbers, right? And if we can, or just, I think just basic algebra, it doesn't have to be rocket science, but like, is this making your work better, you more efficient? Now, if it's adding cumbersome stuff, that's a whole other discussion. But if it's truly helping your work, which frankly, helping me debug code really efficiently saved me good 5 hours of banging my head against the wall. So
Hmm.
or that was just a day and a half ago. And I think as long as it's augmenting work for employees so that anyone could be whatever you're doing and AI enabled.
Gotcha. Now, taking that same scenario, the IT teams get a little nervous because they've been around the block a few times when people say, I'm using this external tool to do X for our business, whatever that is, right? In this case, that X may be summarizing things that their data is coming from inside the company. So there's really a need to have a little more stringent controls on this stuff. So we start talking about AI governance and frameworks associated with governing how you leverage AI. Um, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a very powerful tool, and we've seen some huge hiccups. The Samsung data breach, people putting source code into an external tool. It sounds funny, but I think there's also an upskilling and an education that has to happen. We can, set guidelines and guardrails, but are your employees actually upskilling? I saw a recent European company today announce that they can't use tools at work unless we educate them on it. I was like, that seems, like back in the day, I don't know if you had this, like, but computer lessons. Here is how we type A, B, and C. And similarly, to make sure 'cause these products will look really nice, right? They're friendly. But if we drop some PDFs of sensitive company data into this, even if we just want a summary, that's something that we need to make sure is compliant with the regular regulations of our company. So I really recommend governance, training, and also what are company approved tools can really help simplify it for the everyday employee.
So if these tools you start taking, let's take OpenAI, for example, and all right, our company has decided as a matter of course that we are going to invest X amount into leveraging OpenAI in a corporate world. We're going to have some governance around that and we're going to train our employees. So it sounds like they're doing all the right things, but from an employee perspective, again, taking the generic person who's in finance, HR, operations, or whatnot, um, this changes their way they work, doesn't it? So, how do you see the organization adapting the technology now to support these changing roles?
Ooh, not well enough.
Yes.
You know, I think it's less than a one-off thing and it's a cultural change or a shift. I think the podcast is called Transform Now. And I think some people are really excited about that curiosity. They're like, ooh, like I literally have a friend who has ChatGPT on one of his screens at all times. And so he's just thinking like, how do we play? How do we prototype? But some people maybe went to that seminar and they're like, I don't want to use this. Like, let me bounce. So I think it really has to come from a cultural shift in the company to say, this is something we prioritize. It may take some time. There's a learning curve to any tool. But hopefully it can support people to do their work better, more efficiently. I don't know. I've seen teams that just love it and embrace, and other teams are like, I'd rather, retire than upskill and meet people where they're at.
So you bring up a good point, and that is when we start looking at the sort of the generational divide. We still have lots of boomers that are still in the workforce, Xers that are all over the place. Millennials are making up the bulk of that. And then we have the Gen Zers who are coming real close behind them, and now that's whatever Gen Alpha or whatever the next version of that is coming behind them. And each one of us, each one of those versions of a person sees things differently. So I myself saw things differently when I was younger, but now we have this very large, broad number of generations who are working at the same organization, theoretically doing the same, we want the same things for the company, but we have a very different perspective on it. So for those who are in leadership or in an area where perhaps they have the capability to influence that culture, how would you advise them to support this multi-generational approach?
Gosh, this is a hard one.
Hey, listen, you're a doctor. I'm not going to give you easy questions. Come on.
Well, I think, I think there's a narrative that one could be ageist, that these, young folks are so excited to adopt and prototype and whatever. I've met some people in their 60s who are pushing the boundaries of computer vision. I'm like, woohoo! Like, I look forward to learning more from you. So I think maybe there's a lot of discussion of layoffs and kind of, is this going to replace me? It kind of, is it part of the fear mongering that at least in my work, I like to speak to? Because if Harvard Business Review says that 50% of Americans are worried about layoff anxiety, they experience this. Why don't we just talk about it in the workplace? But for what if we speak to, here's the utopian version of this could help you. You could do less boring clerical stuff. How can we try it on our team versus if you don't do this, you may be laid off soon. That is, I guess, back to my carrot and stick adventure. I feel like more mindset than age is kind of what I want to reframe maybe. But I do notice that if fear and shame are in the driver's seat, you may not get your team on board. I feel like that's for almost anything. But that like play and curiosity and exploration in a safe manner, I think those are the ideal teams that I get to talk to and work with. They're like, ooh, wait a minute. And they walk away being like, can't wait to play. It's a different.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you did your PhD in speech language technology. Is that correct?
That's right.
So tell me how you mentioned a bunch of different things in various other forums on sort of the biases that relate to language as it comes into some of the tools that we're working now with. Do you see that that dissipating now? Is the technology more mature to be able to handle differences in sort of the diversity of language?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, my background is my master's is in linguistics, which people said, like, what are you going to do with that? And then today we have large language models. But my PhD in speech language technology, conversational AI, right? Like now we understand just using ChatGPT, right? It's this back and forth, this back and forth dialogue you're having with tools, and it's all based on language data. So, right, in my PhD, I was doing these projects, and I'm like, 70% of the speech data is all from one demographic, but it's meant to work for a lot of people. It keeps underperforming. It get like a C+ for the target demographic of a phone tree. I was like, but how do we build these better? I mean, this is basic data literacy for anyone building AI. You need to know what your data is underneath it. Your models cannot perform well for your task if it doesn't match. I mean, this seems like relatively easy stuff. But I see that sometimes people are just taking off the shelf and being like, that's good enough. And then if you clean the data or do some basic, hygiene, you're going to notice that maybe it doesn't match, or just making sure all the stars align. So I hope that, Hugging Face, there's so much cool stuff on there, like maybe it's, proprietary internal stuff, but I love doing tutorials where we say, here's what the data is and does have that we can leverage. Here are maybe some gaps, and how does that fit our fiscal goals?
Right.
If you know who your buyer is, like these are kind of who, what, where, why adventures in setting up projects. So I look forward to more of that, but just basic fundamentals of data stuff is required for quality AI builds.
So you mentioned that, and uh, let's think about the who is working with that. I think you've been very vocal on bringing more diversity into the teams that are working on this, because if let's just give an example, I am a middle-aged white guy, okay, and there's probably a lot of that demographic in the broader IT/AI space, right? So in my mind, the data that's out there, in this case, maybe voice data or whatnot, um, that works for me, works great. And we've tested it. I've tested it among my peers who all look like me, and everything seems like it works fine, right? But when you go in the real world, not everybody looks like me. Not everybody sounds like me, right? So bringing that diversity in sounds like is a pretty important thing.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite example, is when I was brought into a company that was working on healthcare phone bots, and it was performing at literally a D. It was just horribly underperforming. And the team was like, what is going on? Like we thought we hit these benchmarks. And I asked, like, what is your data set? Like, what, what's this model? And they said, oh, it's just off the shelf. And exactly to your point, Michael, it was the, unfortunately, default white male, but the people using the healthcare phone tree were Filipino nurses.
Hmm.
This did not map. And which is why they were seeing such poor performance. When they rerouted and said, okay, let's actually get a data set that matches our population, suddenly, performance was much higher. NPS, we could talk about, all the things, goals, but just if it only works with people in the room, those maybe 3 to 5 folks, do those folks map on to the goals you have? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they absolutely don't. So that who, I love who is in the room and who are we testing it on? And if 5, does that match your target user? So yeah, I love anyone can build these things. It's easier than ever.
No doubt. And as part of that being sort of easier than ever, um, we start seeing the AI models taking on additional capabilities, which then changes the roles that the folks in the organization have, because parts of the work that they had done before are now being done within automation or some sort of AI platform, allowing them to, and this is the generic term, to be freed up. We're freeing your time up to do other things, to do higher level things. The fact is that higher level thing, you may never had to do higher level things before, right? You know what they are because you do them at home and you do them outside of work. But in work, you had a pretty defined role. So as these things are changing, how do you approach the transformation of the people or the personnel to help not only be more diverse for the data, but also more diverse in the teams as they're being leveraged within your organization? Because it's very likely that those folks have a lot of experience in your company and understand your customers really, really well. So how do you, what's the technique, or how would you shortcut that to allow companies to understand how important this is and what to do about it?
Oh, this is such an excellent question. And as I've built bots throughout my career, I've talked to business owners about exactly this. Like, oh my, we don't need 14 people to manually review this day in and day out. This staff member has been with us for how many years? Clearly, they're competent. They know our field, blah, blah, blah. My recommendation would be upskilling. Like quality talent is very hard to find. So
Hmm.
if there's an opportunity to move those 14 people to a different role, a strategic role, I love to talk about, like, what is more human? Like, can you talk to use what unique capabilities do those people have with that domain expertise? So I more often see layoffs. I'll be honest with you. Let's just cut that head count. But I think in a longer term strategic vision, keep those people, upskill them, be ready to future proof your company via retention of quality talent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That does. So we start having folks being upskilled or trained. So it sounds like there needs to be, from an executive level at least, some plan for that. So how would you advise middle management or executives on building a plan to support this eventuality?
Yeah. Gosh, I wish more people were asking these questions and thinking this way. So if you're a listener, woohoo, good here. I really think that, so I have a PhD in this field. You don't need a PhD to be doing this type of work. if you are hiring more AI engineers or you're thinking about incubating this, people barely need to code these days to do these things, like
Right.
generate AI code. So if the bar to entry is very low, I would potentially put an internal like boot camp together potentially and say, what can we do in 3 months time? How can we show the fiscal viability of this in 3 months? Put it on quarters, see how that maps up to other company goals. But I think in a longer term picture, uh, reallocating that instead of attempting to hire expensive talent that is maybe reliable or unreliable, I think reorging can be very, very powerful. Like, I'll give an example. My friend got cut from Amazon and she worked there for 5-6 years and she had a Rolodex and they just like cut her team. I was like, that demonstrated Amazonian talent who's so hardworking and you just let her go because that project didn't work out. Like, I think, anyway, just one example of, I was like, that is so short-term lived. Microsoft picked her up real quick. But I think that's just one example of one human and how
Mhm.
about our organizations and potentially those internal upskilling opportunities.
So maybe looking at it from a different perspective. I'm an executive and I have a team of, X hundred people underneath me that are doing these operational activities and whether it's finance, HR, pick any kind of operational activity that happens on a daily basis. Uh, Now I have all this great AI that we brought in and we see some real benefit from this, or at least we've demonstrated some real benefit. Maybe we haven't seen the full project yet, but we're starting to see some real benefit. Like, hey, this could really transform the way we manage our organization and whatnot. How do I, as a leader of that particular environment, how do I know what to do with my people? How do I know how to upskill them? How do I understand that path moving forward? Because like you said, maybe that one project that your friend worked on, it was no longer there, but as you mentioned, it's short-sighted because the skills were still there. Their skills are still part of the team, but the management team maybe didn't see how to reallocate that. So how can I, as an executive who may have those kind of folks underneath me, how can I understand how best to reallocate or retrain those when I just see sort of the tip of the iceberg of the possibilities of AI?
Gosh, uh, these are big questions. You're easy boss here. Um, I would meet with people if I were that executive. I know you said 100 people, but I would kind of look at previous projects and potentially meet with folks. There's one thing, if you don't know these people and you don't work with them intimately,
Mhm.
understanding their goals. Are they excited? Are they those curious folks who raise their hand and say, "Ooh, I'd love to prototype with that. Like, let's make this happen." Um, that mindset is relatively hard to shift. So if you already have people excited and raising their hands, putting them on projects, I think that fiscal viability back to the ROI, making sure you're calculating that for different projects. These are hard questions leaders are grappling with today. Um, if you'd like my team to help you with your workshop, like, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. I really think that I've met with a lot of leaders who are really struggling with this, and it's not really
So,
to me. There's
well, what kind of basics would you kind of go down? Maybe not every situation is going to be different, but what kind of things would you look towards, and what kind of sort of trajectory would you put them on?
I love starting with just a basic POC, like proof of concept, especially related to your vertical or as you mentioned, are these HR folks that are transitioning? Are these IT folks that are moving into more R&D? Like, I need to know some of the more of the who and what they start with. But what kind of project can we put them on? What kind of skills do they need that they do or don't have yet? And then how do we measure what that success could look like? As you mentioned with this scenario, there's already early traction. So how can we triple down on that traction? I love constructive feedback. What's working well? And let's triple down. What's not working well? Let's try to learn from it. I don't think there's a mistake if you're learning. So really understanding how we measure those variables of success along the way.
Gotcha. Now, are all roles going to be AI enabled? I mean, is this like everybody's going to have to know AI?
My mom has asked me this much. She's like, does everyone need it? Do the plumbers need it? Uh, I really, I struggle to think of a role that won't be touched by it in some way. Even the plumber example, wouldn't they want to have some analytics about the neighborhood or, the costs for different pricing? I worked in a
Mhm.
pricing a product recently and I was like, you could change your margins this much. It's like just by knowing when to be selling something, and 10% can be dramatic in some of these businesses. So I think how that enablement looks in different fields could be radically different. And I think especially more digital companies versus hardware or manufacturing is
Mhm.
that I've been looking into. But different flavors of AI enablement. My answer would be pretty all, unless you got one you want to talk and you don't think it's going to be.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that we can all find some way to leverage AI. Just like I would say, we'll go this back and take out AI and put in computers, right? Like scroll back 30 years and people are saying, "Do I really need a computer in my job?" And the reality is that we all use them and we carry one around in pockets all the day. So it's part of that deal of the shift in the thought process of how you leverage the tools you have. So maybe not everybody needs a socket wrench, but AI probably could fit just about every role in some way or another because of the flexibility and the capabilities that it has.
I agree.
So, well, Joan, it was great talking with you today. I really appreciate you joining us, and I will leave a link for your book in the show notes so that folks can pick that up for themselves and take a read of it. And I appreciate you again joining us today because you really gave us some really good answers. And I threw you some curveballs, but you handled them well.
Well, I appreciate it. They're great questions and an awesome discussion. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of enterprise AI, subscribe now. The future of work is here.